Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a series review for The Protector of the Small Quartet by Tamora Pierce. This is the third series set in the Tortel universe. The main character is Caladria of Mendelin, who is a 10-year-old girl when the story starts, who wants to become a knight. While it is legal for girls to become knights, no one has yet, so Kell is the first. Tamora Pierce is one of my favorite authors from when I was a kid. I read all of her Tortel books, and this year I've been rereading them all. Protector of the Small was never one of my favorites, but honestly, upon rereading it, I think it is, as an adult, my favorite of the Tortel universe. The first book in the series is First Test. This book covers Kell when she's 10 and decides to become a knight. Instead of becoming a page like all the other boys, she becomes a probationary page. At the end of her first year, her training master is going to evaluate her performance and decide if she can keep up with the boys. I gave this book 5 stars, which, like I said before, kind of surprised me, and especially considering how young this book is. I do sometimes find with middle grade books, especially when the characters are so young, Kell being only 10, that it can be a little bit difficult for me to connect with the characters, but I thought this book was incredibly well done. This is 14 years after a girl pretended to be a boy in order to become a knight, and it is legal for women to become knights now. But it's still a very sexist, patriarchal society, and Kell deals with a lot of sexism, and I think it's very different than the other books in the Tortel series, because while those books exist in the same sexist, patriarchal society, and the characters deal with sexism, it's very different than in Kell's case. Alana is pretending to be a boy for most of the books, and then after she stops pretending to be a boy, she's already accomplished a great many things and become a hero. So while she faces sexism, it's not quite as bad or as visceral as it could be. And Dane from the Immortals Quartet isn't trying to be a warrior at all. She also faces some sexism, but again, it's not as bad as it could possibly be. Kell is the first time a protagonist in the Tortel books has actually had to confront sexism head on, and it was hard to read at points because of how violent the sexism could get. In this book, but also the other books in the series, Kell is bullied on a regular basis. She's frequently told that she is less because she's a girl. She's frequently told that she's weaker. The boys play mean tricks on her that they wouldn't play on other boys simply because she's a girl. There are plenty of nobles who refuse to be served by her and request a different page to serve them because she is a girl. And it definitely deals with sexism in a much more upfront way than the other books, and there's really no way to get around it here. This is a book that is about sexism. This is a series that is in large part about sexism, and I really enjoyed that. This book also deals more heavily with politics than a lot of the other series in the Tortel universe, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the sexism. There's a lot of discussion of the conservatives in the realm who are fighting against allowing women to become knights and warriors. Kell is kind of the poster child for both sides of the argument, either for or against. People either love her and hold her up to be this heroic girl, or they hate her and think that she's representative of everything that's wrong with the country. And it's kind of hard to read. Like, I really enjoy it, but it's also kind of hard to read because Kell isn't trying to be either of those things. She is honestly just an ordinary girl, and I think that's why I love her character so much. She doesn't have any interest in politics. She doesn't want to be a hero. She's just trying to do her duty to her country, like her older brothers who have also become knights. She's not trying to be anything special or different. I think it's especially an interesting contrast to the Alana books, where Alana wanted to be a hero. Alana came from a very wealthy, very old nobility family. Alana was chosen by the gods. Alana had very powerful magic. Kell doesn't have any magic. Kell isn't chosen by the gods. Kell's family is nobility, but very low nobility. They only became nobles about 2 generations back, and they don't have much money. Kell is very ordinary and very normal, and it's nice to read about a character who doesn't have these lofty aspirations. She's honestly just trying to do what she feels is right and normal. It's everyone else who's making a big deal of it around her. I also really enjoy how much this book deals with Kell's femininity. Kell does a lot of stereotypical masculine things. She's a fighter, so she likes to wear clothes that are functional for fighters, which include pants a lot of the times. But when she initially comes to the palace and comes to her rooms, the boys have vandalized her walls. they've written things like go home and girls can't fight, etc., etc. Very awful things. And Kel decides, instead of tucking her tail between her legs or going home or just pretending like it didn't happen, Kel's going to make a point of her femininity. And she starts wearing dresses when she can, just to make a point that she is a girl and she's not ashamed to be a girl. And I think that was a really wonderful element. She doesn't really prefer dresses, she just wants to remind everyone else that she is a girl and she's not ashamed of that fact. And there's nothing shameful in being a girl, whether it's a girl who wants to fight or a girl who wants to wear pretty dresses. I honestly love that. And then just as for the story in this is wonderful. I don't think there's really any question about whether or not she's going to come back at the end of the year, considering this is the first book in a series, but it's a really, really wonderful book. The second book in the series is Paige. This covers Kel's years 2 through 4 as she is a page. I gave this book 4 stars, and I think a lot of my thoughts are basically the same and are going to be the same, so I'm not just going to repeat myself on all the elements that I think are wonderful throughout the books or that I don't like throughout the books. But my big negative here and why it got 4 stars instead of 5 is because of the pacing. This book is not that much longer than the first book, but it covers 2 extra years, and I do think that was kind of a detriment. There were points of this book where it felt like it was summarizing major life events, like we needed more time with Kel to see what it was like, to see what these events were like for her. And it did make it slightly more of an unpleasant read when things were just summarized very briefly to get through to the end of the book. It wasn't terrible. I didn't dislike this. 4 stars is still a very positive rating. I just think that was kind of my issue, and that was what kept it from being a 5 stars. The pacing was not wonderful. This also felt like a little bit more of a placeholder book. It wasn't that nothing happened in this book, it just didn't feel like much happened of great importance. This felt like a necessary step to get between books 1 and books 3. You can't just skip her entire career as a page. But that did make it feel like the weakest to me. Out of everything that happened, there really isn't much that sticks out to me about this book. I do remember some of the events, but not that clearly. I just have vague recollections, and the rest of the series I really do remember a lot more, and it feels a lot more important. So I do think this is the weakest of the series. It's not a bad book, it's still quite enjoyable. I just don't think it's quite as fantastic as everything else. Everything positive I had to say about the sexism and feminism and politics of these books still stands from the first book to the second. It was still wonderfully done in this book. One thing that does kind of change a little bit is that Kel starts aging, and I really like how Tamora Pierce dealt with her aging. She's going from 12 to about 14 in this book, and she starts growing breasts, she gets her period, and she comments on these things. She has to deal with getting her period for the first time, and it's not a traumatic experience. She's expecting it. She got it a little early, so she was surprised by it, but she has a female maid who helps her deal with it, and I like that it was dealt with, because I do think that's something that gets glossed over in a lot of books, fantasy and contemporary. So it was nice to see a character who was just kind of dealing with that because it was a part of her life. I also like that in this book, you start to see Kel growing into herself as a person. She starts to play to her strengths more, and you start to see other people recognize her strengths, even people who don't necessarily support women as warriors. She starts to win people over, not entirely, and not like she's solving the problem in the world, but you can see that the sexist men she works with will sometimes start to change their minds because they see that she is a very strong fighter. She's very intelligent, she's very capable, and her being a girl doesn't change that. She doesn't change everyone's minds, and she doesn't change everyone's minds entirely, even of those minds that she does change. But it's nice to see some of the characters evolve. The third book is Squire, and this is about Kel's 4 years as a squire to another knight. This is my favorite book in the series. It was my favorite as a kid, and it's still my favorite as an adult. I gave it 5 stars. I think there are a couple of reasons why this book is kind of a standout to me, and the first is the romance. I do like romance in books, and I like when romance is well done, and it doesn't just take over the entire story in a book that's not about romance. Kel starts kind of dating a guy in this book. And she also has a few crushes, and I liked the way her crushes were dealt with. It was very realistic. She was traveling a lot, so she wasn't seeing these guys on a regular basis. So she'd get a crush on someone, and then she wouldn't see them for about 16 months. And when she came back, that crush would have faded significantly, or she'd have gotten a crush on someone else. She kind of worries about this in herself. She worries that she's just flitting from guy to guy. But it really is wonderful to read something realistic. She doesn't just fall in love with a guy at the beginning and that's her true love throughout the series. She's a teenage girl who's kind of just like attracted to a couple of different guys, but not necessarily strongly all the time. She just has some crushes. And then once the real romance does happen in this book, it's so wonderful and so realistic because she's a 16-year-old kid at the point of the romance. She's playing by different rules and she's not sure of what the rules are because her mother sits her down and gives her a talk about her virginity and how noble women need to protect their virginities. But Kel has chosen to become a knight, so she doesn't need to do that. Her virginity is hers to deal with as she wants. And I really like that. I like that her mother was on board. And I also enjoyed that Kel wasn't really sure what she wanted because she wasn't given a set of rules and she wasn't sure what the right thing was. The romance doesn't change her original goals or her motivations. It just becomes a part of her life, and I thought it was wonderful. I also really enjoy her relationship with her Knightmaster. All squires get a Knightmaster who kind of teach them the ropes, and Kells is a minor character from a previous series in the Tortel universe, and he's honestly become one of my favorite characters in the Tortel universe. He's just a wonderful person and a really good role model, and just like an all-around good dude who just makes me happy. So that was wonderful. And of course the feminism also continues to be wonderful. One thing that's mentioned a few times in this book are Kel's periods. She's dealt with them for years now, so she's very used to them. And they're never dealt with in a major way in this book. She's not like getting her period for her first time like she was in Paige. But she mentioned that she would be going out on a raiding party for a week or two and that she just started her period, so she has to pack extra loincloths for that. And it was just like little casual mentions of that I really appreciated because it's not something I frequently see in books. And one of my favorite scenes in this is when she sits down with her Knightmaster, who is this 6'6" giant killer, leader of the king's personal army. And he starts helping her sew up rips in her sheets, and he's just as good a sewer as she is, if not honestly kind of better. And it's just like lovely to see that representation of like a very stereotypically masculine man sitting down to do something that's so stereotypically feminine, and it's not a big deal. It's just like, yeah, this is something I do because I'm a bachelor and sometimes I need to sew my sheets up. Those obviously aren't the only examples. Those were just kind of two that stood out to me as being particularly lovely. The last positive I wanted to discuss is the politics. They're much more apparent in this book even than the previous books in the series. Kel actually deals specifically with a court trial in this book. She talks to the king personally about laws that she thinks are bad, and she starts dealing with taking a leadership position. With her Knightmaster, she goes to various tournaments where she's challenged by conservatives who think that because she's a girl, they have a duty to beat her by the gods in order to show that women are weaker. And it's very interesting in the way it's dealt with. And again, like I mentioned earlier, some people's mind she changes. Sometimes she beats a person or even loses to a person, and the knight will come up to her and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong about you. You clearly are a real warrior. And then of course there are other people whose mind she doesn't change, who continue to be sexist, terrible people. But I do think the way that the general political climate is discussed in this book is wonderful. My only negative for this is that there are still some pacing issues in this, like there were in Paige. It's not nearly as bad, but there are events that are just kind of like summarized. Like we'll just skip over this kind of 6-month period because nothing really interesting happens here. And I'm never really a fan of that in books. I don't want long periods of time to be skipped over because character development does happen there. But it was still really wonderful, and that didn't bother me too much. And the final book in the series is Lady Knight. In this, Kel is a knight, and this takes place over her first about 8 months as a knight of the realm. I gave this book 4 stars, and I was honestly just the littlest bit disappointed by that. I really thought this book was going to be another wonderful 5 stars, and just a great way to end the series, but it wasn't. I found myself kind of bored in this book, honestly. It only takes place over 8 months, which is the shortest time frame of any of the books, but it's also the longest, and I felt like that was a detriment to it. There are no pacing issues in that things are summarized, but it does feel like Pierce at times goes too far in depth. Like, she explains more about the traveling and about life on the road and how Kel takes over her leadership position at a refugee camp. And she goes too much into detail of all those things. And there is just a section in kind of the middle portion of this book where I was bored. I wasn't bored for the whole book. It definitely did get wonderful and things got exciting. I really enjoyed the beginning and I enjoyed the last, I guess, half. It was just, there was a section there, like, the second quarter of this book was just a little bit rough to get through, and it did kind of drag a bit for me. I don't really have anything else to say about this book. My thoughts for this are kind of the same as the prior books in general. The feminism is great, the way it deals with sexism is great, the political climate is great. I do like this series because you really get to see Kel come into her own. You get to see her learn over the course of the series and become a great leader and recognize those qualities in herself. And I do think that's something that's wonderful to see. She starts off just trying to be an ordinary knight like her brothers are, and she becomes someone who's honestly so much more than that, just because she has a particular skill set that is incredibly valuable in the country. I highly recommend this series. This is my favorite series in the Tortall universe as an adult. In the first two series that I reread, there have been a number of just various problematic social aspects, probably coming from the fact that those books were published in the 80s and 90s, where this book was published in the early 2000s. So Pierce definitely did learn and grow as an author and as a person. I highly, highly recommend the series, and I just think it's really wonderful. Let me know down below if you read The Protector of the Small Quartet and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.